Morning, everyone. So, I was really debating whether to hop on here today. Over the last few weeks, I've kind of had a fair bit to process and been doing a lot of, kind of real deep inner work that I'd kind of been avoiding up until probably a couple of months ago. Because I knew that real kind of deep self-acceptance work of the parts of myself that I've rejected all my life was going to be the hardest. And us humans, when we know that something's going to be really kind of challenging and triggering and painful and uncomfortable, it's only natural for us to avoid it or put it off for as long as we possibly can. But today I kind of woke up and felt kind of heavy and bogged down, I suppose would be the right term. And I actually decided that I wasn't going to do a lot today. I was just going to lay about in my pants and just watch kind of YouTube videos and maybe some superhero films. I'm sure Batman would have been involved in that. But as always, when I find myself resting or allow myself to rest, which is probably a better way of putting it, I always come up with just new perspectives and new ideas and new kind of thought patterns that I probably wouldn't have done if I hadn't been rested, which I won't go off on that tangent, but which is why rest is really important. And something that really come to mind was how our experience in childhood, specifically our home life and the relationship that we had with our parents, how we carry that through, for potentially all our lives, but up until the point of, when we're actually aware of it and start working through it. And I just wanted to kind of speak to that, really. So the perspective that really came to mind was how, when we're feeling some kind of way around our parents and, the lack of relationship or, the things that we don't feel like we got from our parents in childhood, how we carry that through and how we hold on to that. And by that, I mean how we hold on to the story that we've created. And this is by no means to dismiss our personal experiences, but it is to recognise how there are the facts and then there are the stories that we've created. And the stories that we've created are not factual. So, oftentimes if we don't feel like we got our needs met in childhood, we'll carry some form of story. It could be that my parents didn't love me enough to meet that need, or clearly I'm unworthy of having that need met, or, they didn't love me, or, they didn't love me enough, or I wasn't good enough. And these stories that we create, we create these stories as the child version of us. When when we're experiencing that thing. Because remember, when we're children, we make everything personal. You know, children are very narcissistic. They have to be to survive. It's all about them and their needs. So if a specific need in our childhood wasn't met, it's easier for us as a child to take on the fact that it's something to do with me, hence the reason why that need wasn't met, rather than believing that it was our parents weren't capable of meeting that need for us. And we carry these stories throughout our childhood into our early adult years and up until, you know, like I said, when we actually are aware of it and start working through it. And this part's really important, because we have two conflicting stories that play out when we become aware of it. We have the story play out that we were a child, we didn't have that specific need met, and our experience was bad, or parts of our experience were bad. And then we have our kind of logical adult story, you know, as the person that we are now, that creates a story that, yeah, but, you know, they had their own pain, they had their own stuff going on, and they're not to blame. It wasn't about me. And this is really, really important, because when we're living in that space of limbo, you know, it wasn't their fault, you know, they had their own stuff going on. And then the child version of us, well, I'm clearly unlovable, I'm not good enough, like, my parents didn't love me, you know, all the child story. When we're living in that space in between and that kind of, that place of limbo, we carry two conflicting stories together, and we hold on to that through, you know, every single experience in our lives. And that makes us feel heavy, weighed down. We doubt ourselves. We find it hard to trust. We don't really know who we are. And that's because the child version of us, you know, that the child that still lives in us and will always live in us till the day we die, has needs that weren't met for whatever reason. That's the fact. That's the fact. And what we need to do is meet that child, you know, through things like journaling or just sitting in reflection and getting into a conversation with the child version of us, and start showing, you know, from the adult, the parent version of us to our inner child, start giving and start meeting the need that wasn't met for that child version of us in childhood. We need to now be the source of meeting that need. And to be able to do that, we first of all have to accept that need wasn't met, without jumping straight to the adult logical version. Well, they had their own stuff going on, and, you know, they were in pain and whatever else, which is true, but it isn't healthy and it isn't helpful right now. It's about separating the two, coming to the realization that this part of you, the child part of you, didn't have whatever need met that it needed to be met. And this means accepting that and grieving it. Truly grieving the fact of your childhood experience and really giving yourself permission to grieve that without suddenly feeling guilty that, well, my parents weren't to blame. They had, trying to separate that story as much as you can so you can actually get back into that child version of you and grieve your childhood experience. And when you can really grieve that childhood experience without the adult story coming into play and fully grieving it, then and only then can you start to reparent that child in a way that has the needs met that weren't met in your actual childhood. And then it's not once you've done that, once you begin doing that, because kind of inner child work, it will always be ongoing. When you start doing that, you actually make peace with your childhood. And you make peace with the fact that it was what it was. Instead of holding on to the stories that you're holding on to now in adulthood that, have you unconsciously go in search of the same experiences. The majority of the time this plays out in our relationships. Unconsciously we'll seek out a relationship with someone that feels familiar and reaffirms the beliefs that we've created from our childhood experience that we're not good enough. And when we're unaware of these patterns that come from childhood, we'll continue recreating this in relationship after relationship after relationship until we're actually aware of it, so we can work through it and actually start calling in the type of relationship that we do want. Sorry. So it's important to separate the two, and it's important to recognize the story and the meaning that we've given our childhood experience about us personally, about, we're not good enough, we're unlovable, we're unworthy, whatever story and whatever meaning we've adopted as a result of our childhood that we've carried around. Once we can separate that and recognize that we have created the meaning, the child version of us have created that meaning instead of the actual facts of it, then we start to heal those parts of ourselves that feels deeply unworthy and unlovable. And this is why it's so important to actually do this work. And what do I mean by do this work? So the work looks different to everyone. Like for me, over the last few years, the work has been all around, all about just sitting in self-reflection, really getting to know myself on a deep level, asking myself deep questions. Why am I thinking that thought? Why is my current experience of reality the experience of reality right now? And really just asking myself questions. Why did I do that? Why did I behave that way? Why do I think that? Why do I believe this? What is actually really going on? Like, what's the kind of subconscious belief that's that all my kind of actions and behaviours and thoughts are stemming from. And you can go deeper and deeper and deeper. Once you peel one layer back, there's another layer. Once you peel that layer back, there's another layer, and you can always go deeper. And the reason why I wanted to hop on here today was because I kind of had like a light bulb moment that, the stories that I've been carrying around with me about, there are parts of me that are unacceptable, and like parts of me that are unlovable that I need to hide. And it suddenly came into my awareness that those were just the stories that I'd created. Now, not the adult version of me now, but that 10, 11, 12-year-old boy created as a result of what happened. What happened, and I've wrote a blog about it, and this isn't about me. So what happened, and because I didn't logically understand why that happened, the 10, 11, 12-year-old boy created a story as to why it happened. And that story I've carried out through my whole life. And, this kind of realization and this awareness and, this kind of processing that I've been doing over these last few weeks to get to where I currently am now. And some of you read the post that I put out a couple of days ago. I've been processing a lot of deep emotions, and coming into awareness of the fact that consciously we know this, and consciously I knew this, but coming into awareness of the fact that there are no parts of me that are unacceptable. There are no parts of me that I have needed to hide away. I just created a story based on what happened in my childhood and in that religion that made me believe that those parts of me needed to be guarded and kept safe. And that story is a perfectly natural, healthy, effective coping mechanism, because it did keep those parts of me safe from further pain and heartache. So I can't judge or condemn that story that I'd created, because it was a perfect coping mechanism. But I also need to recognise now that I had created that story. And now I'm ready to let that story go. And I just want to invite you to really, really reflect on your experience and experiences in childhood, and the expectations that you had about your childhood, and how your childhood didn't live up to those expectations. And I want you to really get curious about the stories that you've created based on the fact that your expectations of your childhood weren't met. Now, this can be triggering, and this can be uncomfortable and challenging. So if certain things come up that feel painful or uncomfortable, like, my inbox is always open. Please don't feel like you're alone. Just reach out if you need to. But by doing that, you'll come into awareness of the fact that your personality and how you're showing up in the world now and in your relationships is as a result of your childhood, and what you're actually trying to do now is have those needs met in adulthood that weren't met in childhood. That's true. But actually, the truth underneath that is you're actually going in search of proof that your stories are true. And what I mean by that is you're going in search of proof that you are unlovable, you are unworthy, like you're not good enough. Our ego wants to always be right. So you are going in search of proof that these stories that you've created about yourself are true. Hence a reason why we'll attract like shitty partners and shitty relationships into our lives, and we'll settle in jobs that just suck the life out of us, and we won't prioritize our health. We'll all of these things because we're trying to reaffirm the story that we're not good enough. But when you can be aware of where that story come from, and then be aware of why you created that story, and you can actually accept your childhood for what it was, and grieve the childhood that you actually experienced and how parts of it were painful, then you can start to actually consciously create the future that you want to create. But I know I've spoke a lot in these few minutes about real kind of deep topics, and there's probably quite a lot to take in. But if you can take away one thing, it would be to separate the stories from those specific needs not being met in childhood. That's the child version of you. And the adult version of you that recognises that your parents were humans and they're not to blame and they had their own stuff going on. If you can separate those two and see them for exactly what they are, but first of all, allow yourself permission to feel and grieve that childhood experience, I promise you, your whole life will change. Because you'll no longer be holding on to two conflicting stories. You'll see the truth of them both. Now, like I said, this will potentially be triggering, uncomfortable, painful, challenging. So please, if something comes up that leaves you feeling even confused, please just reach out. I really hope that this has helped, and I'll speak to you soon.